Right, so it's now 5 past the hour, so here I am back. I'm ready to get started on this linguistics taster. What you don't know, you know about language. So let me first introduce myself. I'm Dr. Luisa Marti. I'm a reader in linguistics at the Department of Linguistics at Queen Mary. And my specialization is in linguistic meaning. So I look at all sorts of questions related to meaning, including what it is, how it's built from the meaning of, from the structure of words and sentences, how it's influenced by context. And I try to answer these questions from the perspective of languages that we know very little about. For example, languages that don't have a written grammar. One of those languages is Atara-i-Mere, a Polynesian language of the South Pacific, where I've been doing a lot of field work on the last couple of years. You can see a picture of me there in Mele, Vanuatu in 2003, um, exploring the article system of this language. Let me also allow Victoria, our wonderful student ambassador, to introduce herself. Victoria?
Hi, I'm Victoria. I am a literature and linguistics student, so I'm in joint honors, and I just started my second year. Yeah.
Um, Victoria will be looking at the chat with me. So as I said at the beginning, you won't be able to use your microphone or your video to communicate with us, but you can use the chat. So any questions that you have, put them in the chat and Victoria and I will look into that. Let's go back to linguistics now. So I want to start by asking you, what do you know when you know a language? And you can use the chat now to write down your ideas about what you think. What do you think as a native speaker of a language? So if you speak English, I'm going to assume that perhaps all of you are native speakers of English. At least, maybe you speak more languages, but at least native speakers of English. What do you know when you know English? Use the chat to yes, so that's the answers are starting to come in. So the words, for example, of a language, the grammar of a language, those are going to play a really important role in what I'm going to say today. Pragmatics, or how we use language in context, the pronunciation of words, indeed, pronunciation of vowels, the sounds in general of the language, the word order. So um, indeed, I have a few examples here just to go over a little bit what you guys have said. So if you know English, you know how to pronounce the words of English. We have the word English itself in a phonetic transcription up there. I was expecting that perhaps someone was going to say that you know how to write your language, though not necessarily all speakers of a language know how to write it and still they know it. And there are some languages that are not written, but they're still known by its speakers. Of course, you know about the pragmatics and you know, for example, what it means to take turns in conversations in your language. You know what it means to be polite in your language. And of course, as some of you said, you know lots and lots of words and you know the grammar of your language. So one of the main questions I'm going to be asking today, in addition to what it is that you guys already know a lot about that, is how you learned all of this, because it's a lot of stuff. How did you learn this? Did you learn this from your parents? Did you learn this from your teachers? Did you learn this by imitation? There's a lot of possible sources where this knowledge could have come from. But what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to try to convince you, and I hope I'm successful in that, that there are very important things you actually already know about your language that you weren't taught. You didn't learn them by imitation, and in fact, you're probably not aware that you know these things. So the mystery of language becomes even more mysterious because I'm going to actually try to demonstrate to you that you know very important things about your language that you were never taught. Did not learn them by imitation. So how on earth do you know them? That's going to be the main topic of today. So let's focus on a couple of the things that you guys mentioned. Let's focus on words. Let's focus on grammar. I'm going to be talking a lot about these two today. So let's look at words. And since we're looking at words, let's just have a few of them um, on the screen. Things like water and house and freedom and connect and announce, read, or even triangular. Um, I've put these words, they're not randomly put into columns here. I've put them in a particular way. Can you tell me perhaps what the words say in the first column on the left, what they all have in common, or what all the words in the middle have in common, or all the words on the right-hand side of the screen? Let me look at the chat and see what you guys think. Yeah, nouns, verbs, adjectives. So in fact, in that order, um, very well. So water, house, democracy, and so on are nouns. The words in the middle are verbs, and the words on the right-hand side are adjectives. The question is, how do you know that these words are classified this way? How do we know that water is a noun, or that announce is a verb, or that happy is an adjective? And there's a very, very typical answer that everybody gives when you ask this question. And I'm going to just give you a little table here. I got this from Grammarly, but I could have gotten it from many other places, including many textbooks, that say that things like nouns are names for people, places, or things. Verbs are names for actions or states. Adjectives describe nouns. There's many other parts of speech that I haven't included here, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions. There's also definitions for those, but we're going to be focusing on the first three, okay? So keeping the definitions that we have here for noun, verb, and adjective, I wanted to ask you if you think there's any issues with some of the words that we have now on the screen. So for example, can anybody tell me whether the words sincerity, democracy, freedom, earthquake, what are they? Are they nouns? Are they verbs? Are they adjectives? Are they a mix of all of them? What do you think? Nouns, they're nouns. Yes, indeed. Very good. They're nouns. However, this definition that we had from before, that nouns are names of people, places, and things, doesn't sit completely comfortably with these nouns. An earthquake, by the way, I would classify that as naming an event or an action, but that was what verbs were meant to do. And yeah, of course, we can say that things like sincerity, democracy, freedom, that those nouns express something abstract, abstract nouns, that they are basically abstract things in a very sort of broad understanding of what the what a thing is. Though, of course, it's kind of a little bit uncomfortable because we can't really point at something the way we can point, I don't know, at a chair and say that's a chair. We can't really point at a thing that is democracy or freedom or sincerity. Okay, that's harder to say. What about the next example? That John left early is annoying. What type, what part of speech is annoying? Let me see what people say. It's an adjective, indeed. Very well. And we said before that definition we had for adjectives, that adjectives describe nouns, but there isn't really a noun here that's been described. Um, what is it that is annoying, according to this sentence? Suppose it's true that John left early is annoying. What is annoying? That John left early, that whole thing, that John left early is annoying. It's not that John per se is annoying. It's not his whole entity and being and actions that we find annoying. It's just in particular that he left early. Okay. In this usage of annoying as an adjective, it doesn't seem like it's really describing a noun. It seems to be describing a whole sentence, but that's not what we said adjectives are. Okay. Now, we can go on like this for a while if we want to. We can quibble with the definitions that I gave you. Perhaps we shouldn't say that nouns are names for people, places, and things, or perhaps we can and say we include abstract things in the word thing, and so on. We can go on like that, but I actually want to say that that's not even the biggest problem that I want to tell you about today. Um, that a bigger problem, there's an underlying bigger problem with all of this, which I think is going to be revealed to us by looking at this wonderful poem called Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll, the author of Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. And this poem is from a very long time ago, 1871, but it still teaches us important lessons for linguistics today. So I'm going to read it actually because it's just so wonderful. Um, I am a native speaker of Spanish, so I'm going to apologize because maybe some of these words you would pronounce them differently. Um, but here we go. It was brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome raths outgrave. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub-jub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tamtam tree, and stood a while in thought. And as an uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, Callooh, Calais, he chortled in his joy. And the poem continues, but I'm going to stop right there because we get the stanza from the beginning again now. So I hope you enjoyed that. I love the way this poem sounds, and I love to read it out loud, as you, I think, saw. But I want to focus on that very first stanza that I read. And I want to ask you, those underlined or bold-faced words that we have there now on the screen, what are they? Are they verbs? Are they nouns? Are they adjectives? What do you think they are? That's brillig and slithy and mimsy and mome. What are they, you think? Indeed, there's a really good chance that the underlined or bold-faced words here that I have in this first stanza are actually adjectives. Okay, let's look at other words. Let's look at gyre and gimble, perhaps gimble. I'm not sure how to pronounce that word. Outgrabe. What are those? Ooh, verbs. Interesting. What are these? Toves and wave and borogoves and wraths. What are they? I think you're gonna all agree. Yeah, there's clear agreement that these are nouns. So this is really interesting because those indeed were, I think, good hypotheses are that the first things we looked at, things like brillig and so on, were adjectives, slithy. Gimble and gyre and outgrave were verbs, and toves and borogoves were nouns. But the question again is, how did you know that when the definition currently that we have for nouns, verbs, and adjectives is that they're describing words for adjectives, actions or states for verbs, names for people, places, and things. Namely, we have definitions that are based on meaning, but you knew the category of these words that have no meaning. Okay, the point about poems um, Jabberwocky is that they're nonsense poems. By the way, that's a really interesting kind of poetry. That this is not the only example of it, because sometimes poets have fun just inventing new words. And I'll tell you a little bit of tidbit knowledge here. If you look back at the whole poem, towards the end of the passage that I read, chortled, the word chortled came up. He chortled in his joy. In 1871, that word didn't exist. So it exists nowadays with the meaning, and it seems like it's some sort of laughter, something like that. Laugh, he laughed in his joy. That word was invented by Lewis Carroll in this poem. Okay, in 1871, it didn't exist. It exists in present day English because Lewis Carroll invented it in this poem. So that's really cool. But many of the other words in this poem are invented. They never made it into English. And yet, you guys, there was quite a bit of agreement that brillig would be an adjective, and slithy is an adjective, and gimble is a verb, and borogoves is a noun. But the definitions that we have for these categories are meaning based, but these words have no meaning. You don't know what a tove is. I couldn't point at a tove for you. And yet I know that that's probably a noun. So it's the same also. If it doesn't work that way for invented words, then you're probably not doing the same thing for words that do exist. So the way that you know that chair is a noun or sadness or Peter is not because of the meaning of these words. It must be because of something else. And I'm going to say, you know that these words belong together. They're part of the category noun because they show Nouny behavior. So the $1 million question would be now, what is nouny behavior? Well, nouny behavior in English, because the kinds of things I'm going to talk about now are specific to the language that we're looking at, uh, has to do with things like what kinds of things can you add to that word? For example, nouny behavior in English is that you can add an S at the end to say a noun like itself noun to make it become plural, like nouns, pluralized. Or the invented word tove, we kind of have this hypothesis from the poem that it's a noun in part because we can pluralize it. And it's pluralized in the poem, toves. This is, maybe you have heard this word before. This is morphology, but that's not the only thing that gives us clues as to what a noun is. Also, the place in the sentence, for example. So somebody else, I think earlier in the chat, mentioned that when we know a language, we know about the word order. Indeed, we do. In fact, that's what we're using to figure out that toes is a noun, because nouns are the typical things that if you have um, like an article, like say the, followed by something, and then perhaps a verb, that thing typically is a noun. Okay. Or if you have um, an article like a, and then an adjective, and then followed by something else, that something else typically is a noun. And in English, nouns appear typically after articles. That's not the same in all languages. So if you've ever studied Swedish or Norwegian, for example, they have the articles after the noun. So the nouny behavior in Norwegian is different, even though it's still about syntax and still about morphology. Okay. What's adjective behavior? Well, in English, you can add suffixes like er and est to something like tall to come up with the comparative and the superlative version, taller, tallest. For a made up adjective like slithy, we have the intuition, I think, if we go back to that stanza, that the word slithy is there, slithy toves. I could say, and still this could be part of the language of this poem, I could say, oh, those toves are slithy, but these ones are slithier, or this is the slithiest tove. That sounds like it would match the kind of language that is used in the poem. And that's because we've hypothesized that it's an adjective, and we've done that on the basis of morphological criteria, not meaning, because we have no idea what slithy means. No idea. And we know that brillig, say, is an adjective, in part because of its shape. Perhaps it reminds us of the shape of other adjectives in English, perhaps brilliant or something like that, but also because it appears after the copular verb be. So it was that typically is filled in by an adjective. It was brillig. Okay. So we're using nouny and adjective behavior to come up with hypotheses about the category of these words. We're not using the meaning because we can't. It's just impossible because we have no idea what slithy or tove or outgrave mean. I'm willing to bet that these criteria that we're using to determine what's a noun and what's an adjective, that's not what you were taught in school. If you were taught anything about nouns, adjectives, and verbs in school, it's that they correspond to those meaning-based definitions of place, names for places and things, and etc. But you weren't taught usually in school that the way to define a noun really is by morphological and syntactic criteria, not by meaning criteria. The reason why I'm also willing to bet that that you weren't taught this in school is because even very little children know this. Okay, let me show you what they know, and that's perhaps it's impressive to me that you guys knew this, but it's even more impressive that 4-year-olds know it. Okay, how do we know that they know it? So here's the walk test. I don't know if you've ever seen the walk test, but in the 1950s, a very famous linguist called Jean Berko came up with this test to test children's knowledge of syntax and morphology. And what she did was she showed 4-year-olds, so particularly children who have not been to school yet, um, pictures like this one that you have here, and she would say, look, this is a wag, where the word wag is invented. Again, we're doing deducing things, lots of things about language and what it means to know a language from invented words. We love to do this, linguists. So um, she would then say, look, there is another one. There are two of them. And then she would say, can you complete this sentence for me? There are two blank. And so she would ask the child to complete that sentence. Okay. She had many other test items, not just for things like wags, but also for things that are not nouns. Obviously, wag is a noun. Why? Because we can pluralize it. We know that. We know now what that the answer to there are two is. We'll get to that in a second. But she also had items like, this is a man who knows how to spow. He's spowing. The same. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday he blank, and the child was supposed to give the answer here. This is a man who knows how to surdle. What is he doing right now? He is blank. Or this is a dog with glecks on him. He's all covered in glecks. What kind of a dog is he? He is a dog. And the really, really fascinating thing is that you guys can fill in these blanks, but so can 4-year-olds. We know since the 1950s, for English, we've repeatedly done these experiments with children since then, but also for many other languages, that very, very young children produce wags in the right context. So these are two wags, spo for yesterday he spowed, or surdling for he is surdling, or glecky for this is a glecky dog. Okay, so children know this. When you were little, you knew this. If you had taken the WAC test, very, very likely that you would have answered in this way. So we must conclude from this that you knew this before you were taught anything about grammar in school. We have to conclude that. We also have to conclude that your parents probably didn't teach you this. Um, and we have to say, I mean, why? Well, because being a parent myself, parents spend most of their time just trying to take care of their children, not really correcting their language. Um, but it also can't be that children learn this by imitation by definition, because all the words in the WOC test are made up words that the children have never heard before. They can't be imitating. In fact, we know that children don't imitate. We know that for a fact because all young children go through a period where they have heard enough instances of, for example, the past tense of verbs to deduce that if you want to put a verb in the past tense, for example, for talk, you add ed at the end. So for talk, it's talked. For kiss, it's kissed. They know that, but they over apply the rule. There's a period before they're 4 years old, so before they go to school, where instead of saying things like he went, they would say things like he goed, or he singed instead of sang, or bringed instead of brought. Okay. So this is a really, really precious time in the development of language for children, because even though these sound like errors or mistakes to us, they actually tell us a lot about the underlying grammar of children. We know that they've deduced the rule, otherwise they wouldn't be producing things like goat. Notice that nobody in their environment produces goat because adults say went. So if they're producing goat, cannot be by imitation, and certainly parents don't teach goat to their children, and teachers don't either. Okay, so it's just really remarkable to wrap up this part about words now, because we're going to move on to bigger units than words in a moment, that we started out by trying to figure out how it is that you guys know that a noun is a noun and a verb is a verb and an adjective is an adjective. We started playing with words that are made up. Slithy and toves, they could be English words. They sound like English words. They're just not English words, as a matter of fact. And in particular, we don't have a meaning for them. So meaning can't be the thing that is what is helping you to determine whether a noun is a noun. Um, we then went on to look at what children can do. And children seem to know those things that I called morphological criteria or syntactic criteria. And that's what you're actually using, even though you're not aware of it, to determine whether a noun is a noun, because you knew that toves was probably a noun, and you were correct because it can be pluralized. You knew that. I just brought it to your consciousness now, but you knew that tacitly before. And we've now seen that children overgeneralize. So typically, nobody's taught goad. In fact, we adults might find that cute because it is cute. But we never teach goad as parents or as teachers, and yet children produce this. We must deduce from that children have internalized the rule for past information in English. But as I said, even if this is really fascinating, it's not the end of the story at all, because um, this subconscious or tacit knowledge that I just brought to the surface, the tacit knowledge that I've brought to the surface now, but also the one you had when you were little, even you don't remember that now, is not just about words, it's also about sentences. So I want to look at the sentence now that you have on the screen. Um, Chris saw the boy with binoculars. And I want to ask you, what are two very different ways of understanding this sentence? Please use the chat to tell me what you think the sentence means. Chris, so the boy had binoculars. Chris has the binoculars, or the boy does. Already we have pretty good answers there. Chris used binoculars. I can see more typing, and I'm going to guess that it's going to be one or the other. So indeed, there's two different ways. They're actually quite different ways. Either he's looking at the boy through binoculars or the boy is holding binoculars. Indeed, Chris saw the boy through binoculars. The boy had binoculars. I'm really, really happy that there's such an agreement here that all of you have very, very correctly identified. I didn't actually have to tell you anything. I don't know if you noticed, but all I asked you was, what are two very different meanings for this sentence? I didn't tell you what the meanings are. I'm going to make more of those meanings now, but I didn't have to tell you. Okay. What you're telling me is that there's one meaning of the sentence, Chris saw the boy with binoculars, where it's the boy who has the binoculars. And I'm going to represent that by putting a box, a green box around the words, the boy with binoculars. And when I put words inside of a box, what I mean is those words somehow go together intimately. Okay. The way that we build this sentence is we put the boy with binoculars together. We make that be part of the bigger phrase. Sometimes we call this a verb phrase because there's the verb saw in there. Okay. So the object of the verb saw is the whole thing, the boy with binoculars. And that corresponds to that meaning that you guys told me about, where let's say Chris is standing here in the room and he has a boy in front of him. He's just 1 meter away. So Chris doesn't need any visual aids to see the boy. And the boy just happens to have binoculars, perhaps holding them or around his neck. Okay, but Chris doesn't have any visual aids. The other meaning is very different. And in fact, I'm going to say it's not only that the meaning is different, but the way we put the words together is different. And that's what the point of this is. In fact, in the other meaning, um, it's saw the boy, Chris saw the boy, and the boy is its own unit. And the with binoculars is somehow outside of that. It's not in the same box. So that's why we have two pink boxes inside of the big VP pink box in there. Okay. This is the meaning where let's imagine that Chris is standing here and the boy is a mile away. So without visual aids, Chris cannot see the boy. In fact, Chris is using binoculars to see the boy who has no binoculars or anything else for that matter on him. Okay, very different meaning, two very different meanings. Now, the important thing here that the point I want to stress is that the words themselves are exactly the same in the two sentences. The word order is exactly the same because it's that one sentence, Chris saw the boy with binoculars. It's that one sentence that's ambiguous. What seems to be happening here is how we put these words together is what gives us the different meanings. So in the green meaning, let's say, the boy with binoculars is all together, and that gives us the meaning where the boy is holding the binoculars. In the other meaning, the with binoculars does not belong in the same unit with the boy as intimately as it did before. And with binoculars is not telling us anything about what the boy has. It's about how the seeing event by Chris happened. Okay. Now, again, I didn't tell you what the meanings were. I've only brought to your awareness now that there's a way of thinking about these meanings in terms of which words go together with what, but I didn't have to tell you about the meanings. Okay. You knew that. Now, again, I'm willing to bet that you weren't taught that the sentence can mean more than one thing, let alone, of course, the boxes or the structure. We call this structure. Some of you might have had some in your English classes, might have been taught something about the structure of English and so on. But let's put that aside. I'm pretty sure that your teachers or your parents, because as I said, parents are much busier, much more preoccupied with feeding you and raising you than correcting or telling you that sentences can be ambiguous. Okay? And yet, nobody taught you this. You weren't imitating anything. If anything, if there is any imitation in language, maybe I would be willing to be convinced that it has to do with sounds, you know? So maybe you learn how to pronounce something by repeating it after someone. But how do you learn about meaning by imitation? The sentence Chris saw the boy with binoculars, when I say that, it doesn't there's nothing about the meaning there to imitate. Okay? Sentences don't come with a label that says that I can see and says, ah, that's the meaning of the sentence. There's nothing to imitate about the meaning of this. So you can't have learned this by imitation or by being taught it. Okay. So it's not just words, that there's ingredients, mysterious ingredients there. How do we learn what words are? How do we learn that all the things we call nouns belong somehow naturally together, or adjectives or verbs? How do we know that when you put words together, you have different options of putting, different words in different boxes, and that has a consequence for the meaning? How do we know all of that? How do children know it? How do you know? One hypothesis is that just like birds are pre-programmed to fly, we as humans are pre-programmed to have language. Okay, so notice that birds are not really taught to fly. They go through a period where different species might do this differently, but you can imagine, I've seen, I think, storks, young storks, when they're become brave enough to think about leaving the nest, they might fall sometimes from the nest. They try a couple times, and then soon thereafter, they're flying. And where the parents are standing there on standby, perhaps if we can imagine a stork's face, they have a worried face. I would have a worried face in my face if I was that stork parent. But they're not really teaching the birds to fly. The birds are the young birds are just attempting a couple times and then they fly. They don't get taught how to fly. And we humans don't get taught language. It's somehow we are pre-programmed. Our brains, our human brains, are designed in such a way that language is a natural thing to happen. You can compare flying for birds and having language for humans with something completely different, say like ice skating. I know of no species of animal, human or otherwise, who is pre-programmed for ice skating. Now, let's look at humans because, of course, we designed ice skates for human feet. So you might say, well, of course, birds can't really ice skate because we didn't design the skates for them. But we designed the skates for humans, and a very, very small minority of us, even a super small minority of those who attempt to ice skate, actually manage to ice skate in the end. Okay. Most of us fail miserably. Okay. If you look at numbers, the percentage of people who actually end up mastering ice skating is incredibly small. So it's ice skating on the one side for humans and for birds, and language on the other side. Very few humans end up mastering ice skating. It depends a lot on how much you practice, and so on. And there's different levels of ability. Some people ice skate better, others never manage to skate very well. But language for humans is very different from that. Unless there's something really wrong with our brains, and unfortunately that sometimes happens, but unless in a minority of people there's something really wrong with our brains, all humans learn a language, sometimes more than one. Okay. And we all learn English, the spoken variety. Writing, of course, is a different matter. How well we can write essays, that's a different matter. But spoken English, we all learn to speak it natively if you were a child exposed to English, okay? To the same degree. To native speakers of English, it doesn't make sense to say, oh, you know more, your ability for English is greater than that other person. As I said, you can write better poetry than another person, or you can write better essays. But that's a slightly different thing. We are not pre-programmed for writing essays. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we're pre-programmed to have language. And by the way, I say have language and not speak, because all I've said so far fascinatingly applies to signed languages as well, to the languages spoken or signed by the deaf communities in the world. Deaf signers can also classify the words of their language into nouns, verbs, and adjectives, not on the basis of meaning, because you can do the WAG test with them too in a signed version. Okay. If you want to know more about sign language, if you want to know about any of these fascinating things that I've told you about and many more, come study with us at Queen Mary because this is what we do. Um, so that's, I think, it from me. Are there any questions? And you can put those in the chat. They can be questions about what I just said. They can be questions for Victoria, questions for me. Go ahead. We're here for you. What's your favorite part of the course? I think that's for Victoria.
Ooh, honestly, I really, really, really like child language acquisition. What were you doing like the work test and like all of that just remind me of this first year module I took on first language acquisition. I loved it. I loved it. I really like yeah, there's like a few different areas that like I really like psycholinguistics, which is well first language acquisition, and I really like social linguistics, like effect on language and society. It's really really interesting, and we work with like it's very like every like lecture and stuff. You always learn something you never realize that even happens around you, and it just is really interesting. I really like these two. Yeah.
That's great to hear. Um, ask us more questions. What else do you want to know about? I agree with you, Victoria, that child language acquisition is just completely fascinating. The minute you start thinking about some of the things that I talked about today, but many other things that are taught in that module, you just start to realize, my goodness, children know so much. It's not that sometimes, unless you know what to pay attention to, you don't perhaps realize it, but they
Yeah.
know so much. And some of the things that we treasure as cute, like, when children say things like goat and stuff, we find that cute. And sometimes parents really treasure that as cute. They actually reveal so much of underlying knowledge. We have another question. How competitive is this course? I want, what do you mean by that? You mean how difficult it's to do well? It is to do well in it? Is that what you're asking? Okay. I think Victoria should answer that question too. I only know this from the other side, so.
Yeah. Um, difficult. I'm not sure because some things will be difficult for some people and less for others, but I would say for me, I find quite difficult working with data. I like it. I find it really interesting, but like because I'm very humanities, sometimes a bit hard to
Yeah.
work with like maths and data and things, especially because like I've only been really introduced to maths like now, like a few things.
Yeah.
But if you like it, I wouldn't say it's incredibly difficult. Obviously, there are some works, like some projects and like assignments that take a lot of time, especially transcription projects. They always take a
Mm,
while. But I wouldn't say it's competitive. I don't know.
okay.
I'm not sure. I really like it, so it doesn't feel incredibly difficult. It's a
Yeah.
nice level of challenging, I'd say.
That's
Yeah.
cool. I mean, we hope to challenge you guys, and my impression is that people generally do quite well. And I also wanted to add to what Victoria is saying, that we provide a lot of support, whether it be during office hours or in the classes themselves, or with modules that are designed to help you write better, or with other things that we have within the school. We have a writing center, for example, that you can take your essays there. So we try to provide a lot of support, and I think that's appreciated by perhaps a lot by people like Victoria. You have these two interests, right, that both play a role in linguistics, both sort of a more humanities, language, say, as literature interest, but also a more systematic, let's find the patterns that we find in this data type of approach. That's the beauty of linguistics, that it can mix those two. You can also, if you like more the data side, you can take modules that are more towards that. If you like more the pure language part, you can take modules that are more towards that as well. But in general, we just try to support you as much as we can. Um, there's more questions. How do you explain? I think I didn't. Yeah. How do you explain that in the language there is my bet as noun and bet as a verb? I use them, I think, in both ways in English. So actually, that's a really interesting question about English. Let's so for other languages, even though I said that English has morphological and syntactic means of identifying what, say, verbs and verbs are, nouns versus verbs are, there's actually quite little morphology in English. If you compare um, a language like English to, say, Spanish, it has much more stuff that you can attach to only nouns or to only adjectives or to only verbs. There's a lot more to learn. If you've ever taken Spanish or, say, Russian or German, a lot more morphology that is much more revealing. English happens to have this ability to have very little morphology and to allow one and the same word to be in more than one category. And bet is one of those. So you can use my bet as a noun, and you can use bet the way I did in the lecture, I'm willing to bet, as a verb. How do you know which one you're using? Well, we know that now. You can look at the syntax. Okay. So if I say I'm willing to bet that, that's a verb usage. Something that's preceded by to, as in to like, to walk, etc. That's typically a verb. Bet, you can say the bet, for example, or a bet, or even my with the possessive, a bet. That's typical noun behavior. So that's, we explain that in English because it's a mix of two things. It has relatively little morphology, so there aren't a lot of things that you add to the words that would be revealing of their category, even though there are some things, and we stress those in the talk. But it also allows fluctuation of words from one category to another, just because English likes to do that. Can you take any modules outside the department, such as psychology? I don't know if you've tried, Victoria. In general, there are modules in the whole of the school. This is STA, so the School of the Arts has degrees in literature, and that Victoria is making good use of that. There's different languages degrees. There is, what is it? They say literature, comparative literature, English, film, and a couple other degrees. You can take not in your first year, because your first year is usually quite set, so that you get a good spread of all the things that you're going to need later, so that there aren't any gaps in your knowledge that will prevent you from taking modules later. But in subsequent years, your third and your second and final year, there is more flexibility. You can take very easily subjects that are offered by the School of the Arts. Now, the one subject in psychology that we offer is actually language acquisition. That's offered to both psychology and linguistics students. I have the impression that we don't allow any other psychology subject or module right now, but I would have to confirm that because I don't remember right now. But I think language acquisition is the one that we allow. But you have plenty of options in the School of the Arts. If you wanted to do, like, you want to do your degree, but you also want to become proficient in Chinese, for example, that's also there's also the opportunity to do that, because we also teach Chinese here, and all sorts of other languages, not just Chinese, of course. So I hope that answered your question. Any more questions?
Can I just say,
Yeah.
because I'm doing my degree is like joint honors in literature and linguistics. So first year we do core modules on both of them. Um, but like this year, for example, I last year ended up liking linguistics more than literature. So this year I'm picked like a lot more linguistics modules, and like I basically just got like the very core ones I needed for literature. So like it's really good actually. From second year you get this more like
Flexibility.
flexibility, yeah. And the module for language acquisition was one of my favorites. I already said that, but it was actually really
Yeah.
cool. It was really
I mean, it's
fun.
just so cool. I can see why that is. Yeah, indeed. So there's, as I said, more flexibility in your second and final year. And there is a number of credits that you have each year that really there's no impositions or no requirements for those. So you can choose from broadly. So Victoria wanted to choose more linguistics because she likes it. So there she went and did that. Do you have modules in syntax? Indeed, we do. We have some very well-known syntacticians in our department. They teach syntax. Both, so you'll get some syntax in the first year as an introduction, and then you'll be able to choose modules that become, allow you to learn syntax more in depth later in the second and final year. What A levels did you do, and how have they been beneficial or not to your studies? Victoria, that's for you.
So I only did one A level because I did an extended diploma in film
Okay.
and media. So I originally was actually going to do costume design for uni, which is very different.
Yeah.
But because I had an English A level on the side, and it was a literature and language A level. I absolutely loved it. I loved it. It was so like my teacher was really, really good, and I didn't know what linguistics was, and she did linguistics in university, and she was like, she told me about like macrolinguistic levels and stuff that
Hmm.
we do a lot in first year, foundations of languages. And I was like, I wanted to do more academic studies. Like I didn't want to go into classroom anymore. So it was really good. And doing I think it is required to do either English, there's some like um, well, it was really good that I did an English A level, and language. So I did learn the basics like of
Yeah.
linguistics before I came, but you were taught them anyways, because if you do just English literature, you might not be te like you might not be taught some of like these basic things, but you're taught anyways in the beginning. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was really good that I did it, but it's like yeah, I'm not sure if that
You,
answers the
yeah,
question, but
you can do other things and still do
yeah,
well, I think,
yeah,
because one of the goals of the first year is to make sure there are no gaps for later on. So whatever somebody who doesn't have an English A level learns, or is missing can be filled in the first year. I think there's a question on word formation. So I think that question means, are there modules on word formation? Yeah, there's word formation and word order. Those tend to be taught together. So word formation being morphology. Oh yes, and word order being syntax. In any of the modules where you see syntax, there'll also be something about morphology because believe it or not, they tend to go hand in hand in language. So we teach those things together. Yeah, indeed. We do teach a lot about word formation. Any other questions? Very interesting questions. We're almost out of time. So I think if there's no other questions, I'm going to call it a day for today. I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about the fascinating things that we can do with language. And thank you very much for Victoria. It's been great to have you here and to meet you. And I hope
thank
to
you.
see all of those who have come here to this chat because you're curious about, to this talk, because you're curious about what linguistics at Queen Mary is. I hope to see you here next year. I hope you choose us. Okay. Bye bye, everyone. Have a good rest of the evening. Bye bye.